Well, hey there, and welcome into another episode of the Web Design MBA podcast. Hope you guys are doing well and want to talk about a subject that will help you, whether you are a solo operator, whether you're just starting to build your team, or whether you are in the throes of scaling your empire. And it's a tool that we have used in our business. In fact, a tool that I think would help so many agencies if they would just implement this one thing to help keep you organized. And it's so simple, it's so bare bones, and yet once you start doing it, I think it will change everything for you. And so again, as you scale, it will help you. If you decide to stay small, it will help you. So what am I talking about? Well, there's a nagging question that actually, it's pretty hard for most web designers to answer, again, whether they're a solo shop or whether they're an agency or somewhere. And this is when it comes to project management. It's pretty hard to answer this question. Where does everything stand? Where does everything stand? Where do I go to get a full picture view of where the projects stand? How do I know how far along we are, how much we have to go? Frankly, how do we as a team keep organized on what we just did and what's coming up next? What do we focus on? These questions are all very hard for most agencies to answer. Why? Well, because if you're a solo shop, you probably are keeping most things in your head. If you are using a project management tool of some kind, which you should be, but if you are, a lot of times I find that web designers who are solo are just using a basic task list and they're not actually tracking things in terms of a project. If you are tracking things in terms of a project, I would ask you, how much subjectivity do you introduce? How much of it is an automated thing? Oh, well, 5 out of 10 of the to-do list items are checked. Versus, here's how we're feeling about the project right now. Here's what we just did. Here are the things that are next up to do. So this question of where does everything stand is a question that companies literally fork out millions of dollars trying to answer that question. Again, the solo shop's probably got it all in his head. Somebody who is a big agency, they might have Slack or some other kind of tool. Lots of bigger companies like to use these chat tools where things just get lost. Either that or there's 10 different tools that keep everything. Slack and Dropbox and GitHub and just all these different things. You don't need all of those things. Okay. Now, one thing that if you have been a listener to this podcast for any amount of time, you know that I am a huge fan of Basecamp. And absolutely, what we use here, this process that I'm going to introduce you to, we do it in Basecamp. But you don't have to use Basecamp. You can use a different tool. Okay, so it's not about the tool so much as it is about the process. Okay, and so a lot of times companies, especially the bigger ones, fail because they're trying to use too much automation. The problem is that it's really hard for automated tools to actually answer very human questions. So in this never-ending quest for objectivity, which can be a good thing, subjectivity is sacrificed. And sometimes when it comes to where things stand on a project, it's a very subjective kind of answer. Again, sometimes we try to solve these problems with tools that should instead really be solved process. And so I want to share this process with you. It's a process that, again, has literally made potentially the biggest difference of any from a process standpoint that we have in our company. And we call it the heartbeat. All right, where did this term come from? So 37 Signals is the company who makes the software called Basecamp. And they have this process in their company called a heartbeat. And a heartbeat gets written at the end of a 6-week cycle for them. So they use a process that they call Shape Up. They invented the process, and it's a wonderful process. In fact, we use a lot of elements from that process in what we do, but we've adapted it for web design and client services. And there's more things along these lines I could talk about, but the heartbeat made such a big difference. So for them, the heartbeat is this sort of 6-week check-in that gives you the heartbeat of the company. And every department head writes one of these heartbeats, and they talk about what they accomplished during the last 6-week cycle of their business, and then what they plan to work on as a department to advance the company forward during the next 6-week cycle in their business. This works well for them. If you don't know, what they do is rather than molding scope to timeframes, they mold, the opposite, rather than molding timeframes to scope, they mold scope to timeframes. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is instead of deciding that these list of features are what they want, and they're going to say, well, we think this will take 10 weeks, or we think this will take 18 weeks, or whatever, they instead have defined periods of time, these 6-week cycles. And they say, well, what, as it relates to this thing that we want to get done, what can we reasonably get done within 6 weeks? And that becomes the scope. So it's fixed time, variable scope instead of the opposite. And so for them, these heartbeats help them at the end of these cycles and the beginning of a new cycle, help the entire company understand where their department is at. Now for us, we don't work in these 6-week cycles. We did toy with a similar process a couple years ago, but it just never really stuck. And sometimes it's harder to do in website design because projects are not all the same. And so we decided to use this heartbeat process as a weekly cadence, as a weekly rhythm. And so essentially every week somebody writes up a heartbeat, and a heartbeat looks at the current projects that are currently going on in the company. It says, hey, here's what we got done last week, and here's what's up next, the focus for next week. This way, everybody can just look at the heartbeat and know that they are on track. So in general, that's how we use it. It's just a weekly update that helps all of my contractors know where we're at with the status of current projects. And it's one place, it's one document that gets written in a shared project that we're all in, that our team can see, so that you don't have to go to all the different projects to get updates on those. Now, you can do that. We'll talk about that more in just a minute, some ways that we use the heartbeat. The heartbeat itself is the tool, a central location where everything gets placed that is an update across the board for all the projects that the company is working on. And this happens every week. It gets written on Monday morning. What that does is helps to give my project manager who writes it scope and time over the weekend, and sometimes he works on the weekend, but whether it's early Monday morning or whatever, he basically can look back at everything that got finished over the entire course of the last week. And a lot of times as the week is wrapping up, we'll sort of do updates both internally and to our clients. And so those updates are fairly fresh. And so real easy for Brian to see what got done and what needs to get done next, and then we can all get on the same page. By the way, let me say this. If this tool was not useful for anyone on my team, and it is, it would be useful for me, if nobody else, and I would still keep it going. In fact, there a couple months ago when we had our little situation where a pretty big client reduced their service with us, I determined that the heartbeat was the last thing to go. I said, if I have to strip away everything else, I'm keeping this heartbeat. Even if I'm doing all the work, I still want my project manager to write this heartbeat. That's how important it is. And so that prompted me to want to talk about this. Why? Why is that one thing so important? Well, because nothing keeps us grounded like that does. Sometimes you got to zoom out and you got to remember where you're at 30,000 feet. And that's what the heartbeat does. The heartbeat is a tremendous opportunity to keep the entire company, even if it's just you, on the same page with where you're at on the scope of things. It helps you know whether or not you can take on new projects this week. Helps you know whether you need to spend 5 hours on this project this week versus 10 or 15 hours. It helps you say, well, maybe this project we're making pretty good progress on. Maybe to bring another project up, we can dial this one back. Maybe we only work on it a couple hours this week. So it really helps you spread your time out and know what is where and just have a really great feeling about the project spread all across your company. Here's some specifics about it that I think are important. So who writes it? Obviously, if you're a completely solo shop and you have no contractors at all, then you write it. And you say, well, is that an extra step? Because I already have it all in my head because I'm the one who's working on the projects. Yes, and that's the problem. The problem is that it's all in your head. And it needs to be somewhere out of your head where you can think about it. And the best thinking happens through writing, in my opinion. And so I think it should be written. And I think if you don't write it, I think somebody who has a very high level overview of the projects that are happening in your company, like a project manager, should write it. Maybe your assistant. Some companies, the owner's assistant functions as sort of a de facto project manager. So your assistant can write it. And that's fine, okay? But somebody who has a high-level overview of what's going on across all the projects in the company. And this is important Like in my case, right now, I have got my personal attention focused on primarily 2 projects, but there's other projects going on in the company, and I need to know what's going on with those. And so if you're at a point where your team is doing most of the delivery even, the heartbeat could essentially be the one thing as a business owner that you can check in on every week and know that things are going okay. I mean, basically, if you keep an eye on the heartbeat for the process and the P&L for the finances, and if you've got a client dashboard that you use for lead tracking and stuff like that, and you could literally manage your agency with those 3 tools. Because all you need as the business owner, I'm convinced, is the heartbeat to know process-wise where your company is each and every week. So who writes it? Project manager or somebody with a high-level overview of the project, and preferably not you, right? It should be somebody else's take on it. You have your own take on it. Let somebody else write it. But you write it if you have to. Okay, who uses it? Everybody uses it, but the business owner is the person who it's really for, in my opinion. And to me, that's been the most useful. It's just amazing when you see it all in one place instead of in all the disparate places. It just creates something for you that I've not seen anything else create. It creates this sense of control, this sense that it's going to be okay because you can see it all and you can see what chess pieces need to be moved where in order to make your company move forward another week in its life. It literally feels like the life of my business. If the heartbeat went, I just wouldn't feel like I had a grasp on the cadence of things. Now, one interesting question is, well, what actually goes in a heartbeat? Okay. Again, it doesn't have to be rocket science. You can make the heartbeat have whatever information is currently the most relevant to you. For us, we tend to find that a description of what was done the previous week and the current status as it is right now, a description of what is planned for the next week or the next most important things to focus on, and then just a reminder of the due date. Those 3 things: a due date, what did we do last week, and what are we doing next week, across all the projects in your company, which if you've got 5, 10, 15, 20 projects, you can see how helpful it would be to get all of that in one place. It makes a big difference. Now, how do they use it? Well, again, the heartbeat, it depends on who is using it as to what it gets used for. Me as the business owner, I use it to make sure that everything is on track and that I don't have to do some high-level management to keep projects moving forward. For the actual workers who are in there doing the work, it just serves as a reminder of the things that, from the company-wide standpoint, are the most important next things to focus on. Maybe if I'm a contractor and I'm working on doing a design piece for a project, I might have my own priorities on what I think needs to happen next week. But if I look at the heartbeat and the heartbeat says that the owner of the business and the project manager has different priorities for the project or projects that I'm supposed to be working on, then that's what I need to focus on instead, is those things. So again, it helps keep everybody centered. So what does the heartbeat really do for us? Well, I just mentioned one thing. It keeps us centered. It keeps us grounded. It reminds us what we got done. It reminds us of what is next to do. It gives us that big picture snapshot of what the entire company is actually working on. And there's just no other tool that I found that can really do this and be helpful for you in the way that this can. So if I were giving you some advice, if I were coaching you right now on what you should do if you're having trouble moving projects forward, I would say that, again, whether solo shop or not, you should implement a heartbeat process. You should start writing it, and that way, whenever you are ready to hand it off to somebody else, you can show them exactly what it is and exactly how you like it. Now, I mentioned earlier that we do use this tool alongside some other things as well. And these are all things that are, frankly, pretty unique to Basecamp. A lot of people don't like Basecamp. Okay, Basecamp gets a bad rap. And the reason why it gets a bad rap is because it's so just countercultural to how most companies operate, especially in the age of AI, right? Most companies are aiming for AI to provide them with these summaries and everything. And they also aim for, again, too much objectivity in their tools, right? A list of 6 things checked off out of a to-do list of 10. And Basecamp gives you that. The problem with that, though, is that it doesn't give you any meaningful content about the 6 versus the 10. Maybe the 6 things that are already done could be done in a quarter of the time than the remaining 4. So it doesn't really give you an accurate picture as to where the project stands. So Basecamp has a number of things that work along that same theme of subjectivity in the process. And when you combine them with the heartbeat, it really is special. Now, I will say that sometimes some of what you're doing can feel repetitive. But I think that's, again, a good thing. It adds a little bit of friction to the process, helps you think more clearly about the process, make sure that you're doing things right, and make sure that everybody's on the same page. So for example, in Basecamp, there's a tool called Move the Needle. It's really cool. It's like the needle speedometer, like on a car dashboard. It's like half of that. And you subjectively move the needle around. And then there's a view in the activity reports called Mission Control that gives you a look at all the needles, where they are, and basically gives you the status of your project. And there's also a red light, yellow light, and green light associated with each time you move the needle, as well as a comments area for you to basically give your update. And so I try to update those at least once a week, if possible, on active projects. And so we have a per project, more in-depth look, subjectively, how we're feeling about the project and how far along the project is. And we've got the heartbeat, which gives that more summarized look, everything all in one place. So that's how we use the needle. And sometimes we'll probably include more information in moving the needle than we will in the heartbeat. And moving the needle in that way can be a great place for your project manager to kind of get the information to summarize it in the heartbeat. It's also helpful if, depending on how big and bumpy your organization is, as opposed to flat, the needle in Mission Control is going to have some very specific information related to that project. But maybe it's helpful for your company, for people who aren't associated with that project, to still have an idea of what's happening there. And so that's where that can also be useful. The hill chart is very similar to Move the Needle, except it gets at the to-do list level within a project and helps you get even more specific. And the hill chart has two separate sides. It goes uphill and then it goes downhill. And uphill is figuring it out, and downhill is making it happen. And pretty much in any list of things that you've got to do, you could refer to those lists as scopes. So say implementing the e-commerce on a website. There's this period of time where it's uphill, where it's a little crusty. It takes a little bit longer to get the work done. You're having to think through it. You're thinking through the problems. Okay, you're figuring it out. And then the other half of that is the downhill slope of making it happen. And with the hill chart update, you can go in and manually drag for that to-do list, the marker, and provide a text-based update with it as well to give an idea of where we're at on that specific scope. And then the final thing, which I'll just go ahead and freely admit, is one that we use, but we don't really use. In other words, these check-ins go out, but my team doesn't really write up anything on them, and neither do I, and I also don't enforce it. But this is something that I think is very useful, and that's these weekly check-ins. And so Basecamp gives you the ability to automatically have the software ask questions at certain times. And so it could be like a question that says, what do you plan to work on this week? And again, if I had an organization where these were employees and not contractors, and I had a little bit more desire and leeway, frankly, to enforce this, then that would probably be something that I would do. You could also have fun with these, by the way. You could say, what's a great book that you read in this past month? Or what's a fun vacation you plan to do? Or something like that, right? So there's all kinds of things that you can do with that. But again, these tools are subjective. They involve writing. They involve thinking. They involve processing where you are mentally, where your team is mentally, as it relates to the projects that you currently have going on. And honestly, for as amazing as these all are, if I had to trade them all for the heartbeat, I would. The heartbeat is the central tool, keeps the organization pulsing, keeps projects getting done. By the way, these projects can go beyond client projects. You should absolutely work in marketing projects and business design and strategy projects into your heartbeat process as well. You can totally do that. Now, one thing I'll just say again before we wrap up for this episode is this is a great process to establish before you scale. Yes, it even makes sense for real as a solo operator. And then once you scale, you can just hit the gas with this established process. The first thing you're going to want to do, I'm telling you, is to train somebody else to be focused on what's happening in the business and be able to write this heartbeat. If I had to hire an assistant and all I could afford was to pay them to do one thing per week, I would make it this. I would make it writing the heartbeat to just help get the mental load of where things stand off of your plate, and then be able to easily spread that around to the rest of your contractors. So work on implementing this heartbeat in your business, and your business will be better for it. Listen, if you are stuck right now thinking about the processes in your business and you'd like to talk to me about that, let's have a chat. Go to webdesignmba.com. You're going to schedule a free 50-minute coaching session. I mean, it's the full deal. It's not just like a fake thing. It's not a lead magnet. It's a real coaching conversation with you and me. If you want to do more coaching beyond that, then we can talk about what that looks like. But this is a totally free coaching session that you can schedule with me. And I hope you do, because I want to talk about how to help make your business more productive and more effective. Again, whether or not you have a team. I have lots of experience to share in both of those regards and would be happy to do that. Hey, God bless. You guys take care, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Web Design MBA podcast.